Welcome back, guys. And today I thought that we could play a little bit of COD and read some r/Prorevenge. So the first toy I found was Stalker Boss ends up regretting it. So I hope y'all enjoy it. I've just discovered this sub and I have the perfect story for it. It won't be a long one because it happened about 4 years ago and I'm fuzzy on the exact details, but it's a belter. I used to work in a convenience store and the store manager was a real prick. Misogynistic, offensive, as in haha cancerous hilarious offensive. Creepy and a downright bully. Sometime after I left, he was fired after he decided to turn a professional interview with a young woman into a conversation about her favorite porn. She reported him and he got the sack. Awesome. Anyway, this guy, we'll call him Andy, fancied himself as a real leader. I mean, he wasn't. He set impossible tasks and yelled instructions whilst doing absolutely nothing in the office in the meantime. I had a colleague called Gabby, who, TBH, I didn't get on with. However, I knew that at the time she was having a really tough time at home with her 3-year-old son. One day in the winter, it had snowed fairly heavily. Gabby rang in that morning and told Andy she couldn't make it in as she was snowed in. Everybody knew that wouldn't have been true, and that it was most likely she hadn't slept well with the baby crying and whatnot, but you know what? Who cares? She always worked hard and she deserved a break. Besides, it was only a 4-hour shift and the store was dead anyway. No customers were going to walk over snow and ice for the morning paper. Plus, we were actually overstaffed. However, Andy had a problem with women. He was always disrespectful and demanding. Like the rest of us, he knew she wouldn't be snowed in, but he didn't let it lie. And I would like to point out, Andy abandoned the store and got in his car. He made the 15-minute drive all the way to Gabby's house and took pictures of her car, her front driveway, and the rest of the street to prove she wasn't snowed in. He then called her into the office at the end of the week for a disciplinary. When she came out, she was in tears. She was on a final warning. Andy wouldn't want a dismissal on his quarterly record, so he basically just threatened her instead. This didn't sit well with anybody. We hated him anyway, but he went too far, making a single mom cry over something so ridiculous. Well, here's the good part. What Andy didn't realize was that on the last work night out, he had drunkenly revealed to the team that he was a serial cheater. He would regularly cheat on his wife of 18 years. He also has 2 teenage sons. He would justify it as having natural male hunger. If you've ever heard of more disgusting quote. And he used to tell his wife that in the evenings he finished at 2,300 hours. That was a lie. He never worked later than 2,100 hours. After an evening shift, he'd go screw whichever side piece he had going at that time. Well, one evening, he finished at 2,100 hours and he got in his car and started driving. What he didn't realize was that Gabby, who wasn't on shift that day, had dropped her son at her mom's house and had waited outside the store in her car for Andy to leave. She tailed his car all the way to his hookup house and parked 3 houses down. She then proceeded to take pictures of Andy hugging and kissing this random woman before pulling her inside and slamming the door. You can see where this is going. Andy didn't come into work for a week. When we saw him next, he looked broken. His wife had been anonymously sent to pictures of him getting off with another woman. She'd kicked him out and had contacted a solicitor to start a divorce process. His sons had blocked his number and wanted nothing to do with him. Of course, he knew who sent the pictures, but he had no proof, no evidence. Gabby stayed at the store for another 3 months before moving into a recruitment position for a pharmaceutical company. As far as I know, she's still there today, and doing well. As for Andy, I have no idea whether the divorce went through or not. I blocked him on all social media after I left the company about a month after this whole thing happened. What I do know is that he's a disgusting, reprehensible human being who thought he was invincible. He thought he could walk all over people, bully, and belittle as he wanted. Well, he soon realized that nobody is invincible, and thoroughly enjoyed watching his collapse. The end. So that was a pretty crazy story. I definitely think Andy got what he deserved. I found another story that we can read tonight. It's called Homophobic Parents Made My Life Hell for 2 months, so I gave them a taste of their own medicine. And I'm pretty excited, so let's get to it. So back when I was 15, I had a father who we'll call Deadbeat Joe. Deadbeat Joe was a stereotypical deadbeat father, as he almost never contacted me under his own volition, and he resisted paying my mother child support whenever he could because he hated her as she left him and took his baby away from him, so he took it out on me. His words, not mine. My mother, being the saint she was, never talked bad about him and tried to endorse a relationship between us throughout my entire childhood. I did love Deadbeat Joe and would often want to spend time with him, but to no avail, because he was always busy getting his pee-pee wet with some rather questionable women, so I was basically forgotten about by him until the few occasions when he realized he remembered that he had an older son. Because of that, I was raised by my mother and my stepfather, who I call Dad. They really loved and still do love me, and they worked their butt off to make sure that I was well cared and provided for. Unfortunately, me and my family had to move away to another state when I was 12, which meant that my parents ended up buying a house, which we moved into. Now, something to mention up to this point, we were very poor, and my parents ended up buying a house after getting a great deal for it. However, this house was and is very poor quality, and my parents didn't know that, so we ended up basically getting scammed. My mother lost her job, and over time we ended up becoming so poor that we ended up having to rely on food banks to supply us with the food necessary to survive. Luckily, or rather unluckily, Deadbeat Joe and his new wife, who we'll call Chris, said that they'd take me in and that they had a good, decent quality of life which my parents bought, because to my mother, Deadbeat Joe didn't really seem like the type of guy who would lie about something that big, so despite my objections, I hated Deadbeat Joe by this point. I went to live with Deadbeat Joe and Chris, plus their kid, due to the fact that my real parents weren't about to lose our home at the time, and they didn't want me to be homeless along with them. At first, they were very welcoming, but after a few weeks, things started to change. Both Chris and Deadbeat Joe had lied, and they were just as poor as my parents were. Over time, Chris had started to show the violent side of herself, and Deadbeat Joe found out I was gay, which was a problem due to the fact that he was very Christian. They both really hated how I was LGBT, despite claiming otherwise, as Deadbeat Joe felt that I needed mental help, because he felt that being gay was an illness. They tried to force me to conform to their beliefs that being gay was wrong, but I refused, which made them very angry. Chris also ended up being horrible and manipulative to me on a regular basis, as she would do things like set up a schedule for the time for us kids could do certain things, refused to let me go to school for no reason, threatened to isolate me from her entire family if I didn't do what she wanted me to, etc. Due to all this, it caused me a lot of stress and anxiety over the 2 months I stayed there, and I would cry a lot in the corner of my room, wishing that the fuse that kept breaking would set the house on fire and take me with it. It built up a lot of anger and resentment within me, and all of these things that Christian and Deadbeat Joe would do and say to me. After a while, the honesty in the house built up, and I would eventually be accused of being a pedophile who wanted to molest my brother, because Chris said that someone looked up child porn on her cell phone. Deadbeat Joe ended up taking away my phone and threatening me with knives, which accumulated to me taking my phone back and running away to hide in the bushes outside of the trailer park we lived in. The cops came, my parents manipulated the situation to make it seem like I was a terrible child, and they left. The next week was a living hell afterwards, as Chris and Deadbeat Joe kept trying to get a confession out of me and kept threatening me, but I held my ground and was able to leave their house and move back in with my parents. But at this point, I was seething with rage, but I didn't do anything to them as I wanted to move on. However, a month after I left her house, I remember the smug face Chris made throughout the week she kept me a prisoner in her house and kept trying to ruin my life. I decided I hated her too much to not retaliate against her and her husband, so that's what I ended up doing. The revenge. I decided that I would sign Chris up for all the spam and junk mail I could find using the information I could find online and on the school dictionary at the school she worked at. Looking to hear the scared world of psychology? Click. Want to hear about our crappy products that will fall apart after one use? Click. Want to hear some hot, sexy women getting on with each other? Click, click, click. Next, I decided to send Chris's family some recordings I took of some of the things that she would say to me, during my stay at Chris's house. I had recorded the things that she was saying to me, so I had evidence to show my parents that she was abusing me. I ended up sending those recordings to all of her closest friends and family before blocking them. They were very bad, so it wouldn't have surprised me if some of them ended up distancing themselves from her after listening to it. Lastly, I decided that I would continue to make Deadbeat Joe pay my mother for what he owed her in child support. I was originally going to ask my real dad to adopt me, but after learning of how much money Deadbeat Joe had to send my mother, around $1,200 per month, I did the math and calculated out of spite that I would let my mother keep on milking him for what he was worth until I turned 18. It's going to be quite a bit of time before I become an adult too, as currently I'm 16. So by the time I have turned 18, DJ will have to legally pay my mother $25,000 over the next few years of my life, which is definitely not something to sniff at. I never heard back from my evil parents after I carried out my revenge against them, so I don't really know how their immediate reaction towards what I'd done was. However, after going back to the school directory to see if any changes were made to it, I discovered that almost all of the teachers' info was scrubbed from the site, and my stepmother's name was nowhere to be found. I connected the dots, and it made me realize I had caused an entire site-wide change, and the reason why I'd never hear back from my abusive parents was because of how badly I had humiliated Chris, and I knew that Chris would have flogged Deadbeat Joe if he dared try to talk to me again. After realizing this, I laughed so hard I almost peed myself, and I left the school's website. Currently, I'm studying for an exam that will earn me certification in an aspect of design which is important for the field I want to get into. I'm taking my education seriously, and I now have opportunities that I wouldn't have been afforded had I stayed at Chris's house. I have made some new friends and have now moved on from the things that my parents did to me. TLDR, evil homophobic biodad and stepmother make my life a living hell for 2 months. I enacted my revenge, and now they have to pay my real parents $25,000 over the next 2 years of my life, and have gotten outed as abusers to their family and friends.
Is touching the truth.